My plea this evening is that if the Kenyans give me the privilege of leading this country, my vision will focus on three main pillars: reset Kenya to constitutionalism and adherence to the rule of law, restore the independence and the integrity of national institutions, and rebuild our economy. If I'm privileged to lead this country, impunity will end. Starting with me, and I please want you to understand me, listeners. So when I say everybody will have to obey the law, it will have to start with me. It will have to be a rule that must be obeyed by my family, by my friends, and everybody. Thereafter, I will face corruption head on. I will deal with corruption head on. My name is David Maraga. I'm the immediate retired Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya. I served as Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya between 2016 and January 2021. I retired on the 12th of January 2021 upon attaining the mandatory constitutional age of 70 years. This is after I had been in the judiciary for about 18 years as a judge of the High Court, Court of Appeal, and ultimately as the President of the Supreme Court of Kenya. Those who were around in Kenya and watched, you saw that as I stepped on the in the steps of the Supreme Court on the last day, as I was handing over to my deputy then, I did warn judges. Quite a number of them were present. I did warn them of the drums of political war which were being beaten at that time. And I warned them against compromising the integrity of the processes in the judiciary, as that would create a lot of problems for our country. I particularly warned about impunity and requested them to always uphold the rule of law, because that's the only way sustained economic prosperity and the long-term political stability of our country can be guaranteed. Even though I knew of the dire situation we were facing at that time I was retiring, I did not foresee that our country would descend to the level of impunity, economic despair, and rampant corruption where we find ourselves in today. I had no political ambition at all. As I left the office, what was key in my mind was to rest, talk to young people wherever opportunity came, mentor some, and I've been doing that in the colleges, schools, and the churches. However, observing what happened in our country on the 25th of June last year, during the Gen Z protest against the finance bill, I was horrified by the response of the state. The youth were seeking accountability on the use of public funds, but the violent response of the Ruto administration was brutal. I was shocked. I was shocked. These people had only their telephones. Why use that amount of force? That tells you a government that goes to that extent leaves people wondering whether they have any further legitimacy to continue governing. It was a very sad state of affairs. After those protests and the failure to address the core demands the youths were making, several names were banded as alternative leaders for our country. quite a number of names were given. Mine was mentioned once or twice. After that, I dismissed the issue because I'm not a politician. However, after several days of prayer and consideration, when I was requested by some to think about vying for the highest seat, I took time, prayed over the issue, consulted first with my family and the close friends. Then I realized, and I came to the conclusion that I need to contest. If only I can bring change to our country. So my plea this evening is that if the Kenyans give me the privilege of leading this country, my vision will focus on three main pillars: reset Kenya to constitutionalism and adherence to the rule of law, restore the independence and the integrity of national institutions, and rebuild our economy. I'll briefly explain what I mean by those. Reset Kenya to constitutionalism and adherence to the rule of law, with emphasis to zero tolerance with corruption. In my view, ladies and gentlemen, impunity and corruption are an existential threat to this country. Unless radical steps are taken to stem them, we risk our national stability as well as well-being as a nation. It is common knowledge that Kenyans are very hardworking people. Comparatively, Kenya is not so poor to need to borrow for budget support. However, because of looting of public resources, wanton looting of public resources, mainly through budgeted corruption, our national debt has reached an unimaginable proportion. Our national debt today stands at 11.2 trillion and is set to exceed 70% of the GDP, against the limit that is set in our law of 55% of the GDP. The stock comprises of 6.2 trillion of external of domestic debt and 5 trillion of external debt. Why am I making that distinction? Why I'm making that distinction is that the domestic borrowing affects the cash flow in the country. The businessmen have to compete with government in getting funds from the banks. And as a result, interest rates go very high to a point that the business are not able to make any sensible business profit when they are growing at a very high rate. This, in my view, should not be allowed to continue. If we go on like this, we are going to run into very serious problems. You may not be aware that when the debt fell due, we borrowed to repay. You borrow from one bank to pay another. That's where we are. Technically, what that means is that the country actually defaulted. It's only that it was able to convince some lenders to get money. My leadership, if I'm allowed by Kenyans, will focus on fostering the culture of integrity, enforcing laws and impartiality, and making sure that we don't our borrowing is responsible, and we mind about the market. As you all know, fellow Kenyans, for far too long, we have allowed impunity to override obedience to the law. Many state and public officers have embraced the utadu mantra and simply do as they please. The result is wanton corruption and the paralysis of service delivery. Because of interference of investigations, those of you who have been around for a while know what I mean by that. There was one time we were told that when you don't want a case to succeed, you get investigations corrupted, so that the evidence that comes cannot sustain a conviction. Because of that, not many of those who commit economic crimes especially are charged. Those who get charged are those who can't buy their freedom. What is the result of that? Criminal cartels freely and contemptuously operate with impunity. And some of the cases that have gone on to the shock of Kenyans are crimes that have been sponsored by the state. You saw the Gen Z protests and the kidnapping of the young people. Some of them were killed. If I'm privileged to lead this country, impunity will end. Starting with me, and I please want you to understand me, listeners, and Mr. Gondi and your colleagues. I don't want to preach water while I'm taking wine. So when I say everybody will have to obey the law, it will have to start with me. It will have to be a rule that must be obeyed by my family, by my friends, and everybody. Thereafter, I will face corruption head on. I will deal with corruption head on. I will end the current political culture of vote buying and electoral corruption practices. You understand what I mean? I mean by that. We have people who go and pay voters to vote for them. And that has become a culture. I will commence radical and fundamental changes to the public service in a manner that will ensure that the public officers respect the public, who after all are their bosses. What has made the situation worse is that due to the amendment of the old constitution and the law, public officers were allowed to engage in business. Of course, there are provisions which were left in the law that there should be no conflict of interest, but they traded in companies. And they traded with the government. They are the ones who would get tenders, or who would still get tenders as a result of the Session of Paper number 10 of 1965 and the Endeavour Commission, a report that allows them to do business. As a result of that, through theft of public resources, state officers eventually some of them end up contesting elective positions. Not just to protect what they have taken, but to continue stealing from the public. They steal your money, they bribe you to vote for them, you elected them, and they continue with the looting spree. They start by recouping what they have spent in the election. Then they build war chests for the next election. And all that at public expense. They will continue to do that. As a matter of fact, and you must be aware, it is in public news, new entrants into the political scene, flaunting looted public resources, are eyeing electoral positions, including the presidency. Fellow Kenyans, my plea to you is that we must stop this kind of practice. We must stop this kind of practice. People steal from you and bribe you with the same amount of money and you vote him in. Then he goes on stealing. And then what are you left with? You have no medicine in hospitals. The children can't go to school because of various problems.